Continuation of the book, The New Map, Chapter 27, Iran's Revolution. The battle today between Saudi Arabia, the largest oil producer in OPEC, and Iran, normally one of the other major ones, is a struggle for predominance across the map of the Middle East. It is a battle shaped by the clash of religion, ideology, and national interests, and by the drive for primacy. Oil is integral to this battle, and the impacts in turn are global. The scorn with which Iran and Saudi Arabia regard each other is hardly muted. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's current supreme leader, denounces the Saudi royal family as sinful idols of arrogance and colonialism, as idiots and milk cows for the Americans, and as heartless and murderers. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, in turn describes Khamenei as the Hitler of the Middle East, trying to conquer the world. MBS adds, if you see any problem in the Middle East, you will find Iran. The religious root of this struggle goes back to the 17th century and the battle that ensued after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. Who would be his successor? His father-in-law, Abu Bakr, or his son and son-in-law, Ali. The Sunni are followers of Abu Bakr, who became the first caliph. But his legitimacy was and is contested by the Shia, the party of Ali. Each group regards the other as heretics. For all Muslims, of course, whether Sunni or Shia, Medina and Mecca in Saudi Arabia are sacred cities. The Shia are the majority in theocratic Iran. In Iraq and in Bahrain, they are also significant in eastern Saudi Arabia, Syria, where the ruling Alawites and the Med and Shia of root, Lebanon, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, and India. The Houthis in Yemen are today, if not always, considered the Shiite-related sect. In the 1960s, Shia Iran, under Shah Mohammad Pahlavi, and Sunni Saudi Arabia were allied in their opposition to their common enemies, Soviet encroachment in the region, Ba'athists, Arab socialism, and most notably, as already noted, to Nasser and his Pan-Arab campaign. But at the beginning of the 1970s, when the British decided that they could no longer afford to maintain a military presence in the Gulf, the Shah, with the strong support of Washington, stepped forward to be the regional power, the policeman of the Gulf. The Saudis saw him as a megalomaniac. The Shah pushed for pell-mell modernization and rapid economic growth. The flood of petrodollars that came with the fourfold increase in the oil prices that followed the October 1973 war enabled him to push even faster and to spend massively on weapons. The oil wealth may have driven growth. It also turned Iran into a case study for the resource curse, leading to rampant inflation, mushrooming slums, wasteful and unproductive expenditures, and widespread corruption, all of which meant vast social dislocation, which fed rapidly growing discontent and opposition across the political and social spectrum. The Shah's most resolute enemy was the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, an austere, single-minded, narrow, and intensely devout of Shia cleric, implacable in his resistance and ruthless in destroying those who stood in the way of the Islamic Republic ruled by the clergy. From exile, Khomeini called for an Islamic revolution. The country was thrown into turmoil by strikes and larger demonstrations, marked by increasing violence. In January 1979, with the regime crumbling, the Shah left Iran. 2 weeks later, the 77-year-old Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile to a tumultuous reception. Shortly after, Khomeini proclaimed himself the supreme leader of the revolution. Critics of the Shah rushed to embrace Khomeini. In the New York Times, a prominent Princeton professor trumpeted how Khomeini would provide a desperately needed model of humane governance for a third world country. Khomeini and his followers moved to consolidate power. Hundreds were shot in a few months on the roof of Khomeini's headquarters in 1979. In November, after the Shah was admitted to the United States for cancer treatment, a mob of young Iranian zealots following the Imam's line invaded the U.S. Embassy. They were to hold 52 American diplomats hostage for 444 days under degrading conditions. Khomeini and his allies used the seizure of the hostages as the opportunity to take complete control. The Ayatollah introduced the new constitution that is the basis for the political power in Iran today. It enshrined the Velayat-e-Faqih, the guardianship of the Islamic jurists, and the ultimate power of religious scholars. With Khomeini having final say as the chief jurist of supreme leader, since he takes his authority from Allah, his word is therefore unchallengeable. The supreme leader has control over the Guardian Council, which decides who can run for office, and has final approval over parliament acts. He also has control over the Revolutionary Guard, the mainstay of the region, and the media, and the judiciary. The elected president is subordinated to the supreme leader. Under this new constitution, there were few bounds of the authorities of the Ayatollah Khomeini. His legitimacy, he asserted, came from the Prophet, and from God, and from his expertise in Islamic law. In short, one scholar has written, Khomeini has obtained constitutional power unimagined by Shahs. While Iranian presidential campaigns and the shifts they may portend get global attention, these constitutional arrangements and Islamic Republic, under the control of the most conservative parts of the Shiite clergy, remain the foundation for the way Iran is ruled today. This theocratic regime would take control of the economy to a much greater degree than did the Shah's regime, both directly and through foundations and the Revolutionary Guard, which is the way Iran's economy works today. The Iranian Revolution shook the regional geopolitical order and cemented deep fault lines that run through the region today. Khomeini's new constitution made abundantly clear that the revolution was not just for Iran but also was meant to form a single world community. Khomeini himself declared Iran has only been the starting point. The objective was to destroy all oppressive and criminal regimes. To this end, he proclaimed that Iran must export the revolution to other countries and reject the idea of containing it within our borders. Major targets for Khomeini would include Saudi Arabia, Egypt's President Anwar Sadat, who had the temerity to make peace with Israel in 1979, the little Satan, Israel, and the great arrogance, the United States. The Iranian Revolution would draw the United States much more deeply into the Middle East, would shape American foreign policy to the present day, and would have far-reaching effects on the region itself. The chapter 28 talks about the wars in the Gulf. But it was not only the Iranian Revolution that drew the United States into the Gulf. On Christmas Eve 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, under the mistaken belief, in a fit of collective paranoia, that the local communist leader was secretly dealing with the United States. In Washington, the invasion came as a massive shock. The Soviet Union had launched the first large-scale deployment of military forces beyond the communist bloc since the World War II, and with the Shah gone and the security system of the Gulf in disarray, and Iran no longer the regional policeman determined to resist Soviet moves, Afghanistan was seen as the potential first step in a Soviet campaign toward the Gulf and control of the Middle East oil. In January 1980, President Jimmy Carter told aides he needed to preach a sermon, so we let the Persian Gulf countries know that we will be there if the Soviets invade, and let the devil take the hindmost. In the State of the Union address to Congress, Carter declared, "The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan could pose the most serious threat to the peace since the Second World War." His response was the Carter Doctrine, building on what U.S. President had been saying since Harry Truman. An attempt by an outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault of the vital interests of the United States of America, said Carter, and such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force. The United States had taken on the direct security role, protecting the Gulf and the oil that Britain had abandoned less than a decade earlier. For Moscow, the invasion would prove much more costly than the Kremlin could have imagined, for it would help set in motion the process that would lead to collapse of the Soviet Union. It would also unleash a new jihadist, the impact of which would reverberate around the world and would reach to the very heart of the Arab world, throwing the region into crisis. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein had brutally consolidated control, destroyed all potential rivals, real and imagined, and stepped forward to seek the mantle of leader of the Arab world. The Arab peoples, he said, invoking the Ba'athist ideology of the regime, were one nation. He would aim to reshape the Middle East. In February 1980, a report from the U.S. Interest Section in Baghdad, the United States did not have an embassy there at the time, described the dictator as an egoist of massive proportions, thoroughly accustomed to adulation, obedience, unctuous publicity, slavish devotion, and servility. He acknowledged the cheers of the masses with a cool, distant smile and an upraised royal hand. To work for Saddam Hussein at the senior level was terrifying. He looked you straight in the eye, as if to control you, said one of his officers. One moment he would be extremely affectionate, the next moment he would be extremely hostile and cruel. Saddam's predilection for taping everything, even his meetings with his most senior confidants, created an enormous trove of recordings. Recovered after the 2003 invasion of Iraq, they provide not only Saddam's voice amid his inner circle, but also an extraordinary window into his cynical thinking and blundering decision-making. Oil was the enabler that made Saddam what he became. The increase in oil prices that followed in the 1973 war brought a tremendous windfall to Iraq. financed the command economy and launched the large-scale industrialization projects. Most important of large-scale industrialization, the oil revenues also paid for a modernized and vastly expanded military. Yet in 1979, Iranian revolution and the emergence of the Shiite state posed an immediate threat for the Ba'athist regime in Baghdad. Saddam and his clique were part of a Sunni minority that ruled Iraq. Despite fierce repression, the majority Shiites were becoming more restive, and resistance groups were organizing underground. Saddam's burning hatred for Khomeini, and Saddam, as Saddam called them, the satanic turbans, was fully reciprocated by Khomeini, who saw the Ba'athists as the secular Sunni minority repressing the Shiite majority. Os sunitas e xiitas, said Khomeini, was not just the little Satan, but also a pig, and the Ba'athist regime a blasphemy against Islam. Everything that Saddam heard from his intelligence services confirmed that a great opportunity was at hand. Iran was fragmenting, they reported, torn up by internecine warfare, descending into a state of chaos, crimes, and law-breaking, with an increase in the disintegration and dismantlement of Iranian forces. Saddam envisioned a limited war and a quick victory that would bring great benefits at a low cost. He would conquer the Arab-speaking province in the Kazakhstan, part of which had been historically known as Arabistan, with 9% of Iranian oil reserves, free it of the Persian yoke, and add its oil riches to the economic arsenal of what was going to be his new Arab superpower. He would undermine Khomeini's and end its threat to his regime, and he would enshrine his position as the leader of the Arab world. We have to stick their noses in the mud, Saddam said of the Iranians on September 16, 1980, in a meeting with top officials. This cannot take place except militarily. On September 22, 1980, Iraq launched the battle with what were supposed to be knockout air raids on the Iran. Instead, Saddam had blundered into what would prove a long and bloody stalemate, the longest major war of the 20th century. The Iranian forces were bolstered by the emergence of the battlefield of a new force, the Pasdaran, or Revolutionary Guard, initially a poorly trained militia, but fanatical fighters devoted to the Khomeini revolution. Saddam's forces used what was called special ammunition, chemical weapons, but his drive, in his words, for the Arabic atom was set back and forced underground when Israeli jets destroyed the Osirik reactor that would produce fuel for a nuclear weapon. During the war, both Iran and Iraq were hard hit by the collapse in the oil price in 1986 and their respective declines in production and exports. But Iraq had bunkers. It received many tens of billions of dollars in loans from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Iran, however, did not have bankers. It was running out of money. In 1988, senior members of the Islamic regime persuaded Khomeini that Iran was going to be defeated. He accepted the United Nations ceasefire, though describing this decision as a more painful and deadly to me than drinking a cup of poison. The war had cost 500,000 lives and another million wounded. Saudi Arabia, despite its antagonism towards Saddam Hussein and the Ba'athist regime in Baghdad, had supported Iraq with money and weapons during the war as a bulwark against what seemed the greater and more immediate threat, revolutionary Iran. The animosity between Tehran and Riyadh never ceased. Iran sponsored the creation of a new terrorist organization, Hezbollah al-Hijaz, with the aim of either toppling the Saudi monarchy or at least facilitating stability and the secession of the eastern region of Saudi Arabia. It launched attacks both within the country, including against oil installations and military targets, and against Saudi diplomats abroad. I don't know where it will end, this Saudi King Fahd in 1988. Iran has harmed relations not only with us, but also with its neighbors and the whole world. Iran has tried many times to undermine security in the Gulf region, the Arabian Peninsula, and the world. What has Iran gained? Iran has gained nothing. Yet he would add, we cannot change the geographic reality of Iran, and Iran cannot change our geographic reality.